And it really is an American tragedy unfolding. I mean, we are losing a generation to drug overdose deaths. And I really can't explain the magnitude of this problem. It's a term now that's been coined to describe a mixture of fentanyl, the illicit opioid, laced with xylazine, which is essentially horse tranquilizer or painkiller for cattle. But these addicts are unfortunately ingesting this and having just these horrible consequences and effects, like rotting skin falling off their bodies and seeing these open sores all over. In some cases, seeing even the bone hanging down from their bodies here with the skin after ingesting this Tranq fentanyl. So it's really scary stuff. Really hard to tell. This is a drug that's just started to emerge, I'd say, in the past few months. The first real serious reports came out of the U.S. city of Philadelphia in the Kensington neighborhood, which is just like this zombie apocalypse. You have people just walking around totally dazed and confused on who knows what, likely this fentanyl, and in some cases, unfortunately, the Tranq fentanyl. And you have these people lying around with open wounds and sores, and in many cases, leading to amputations. Then, we start to hear about reports of this spreading to the West Coast, especially in places like the Pacific Northwest, Portland, San Francisco, and now most recently, Seattle. It's gotten so serious and bad that the DEA put out a warning just last month that Tranq is here, that law enforcement as well as health officials should be looking out for this stuff. And the problem is, whereas fentanyl, you can use Narcan to reverse some of the effects of an overdose, there's nothing right now really to reverse the effects of Tranq fentanyl. I've been covering this now for Discovery Institute as an independent journalist and senior fellow here for about a year. And I've been in Seattle for 3+ years, worked in, local television news before I made the transition to full-time covering the homeless crisis. And it really is an American tragedy unfolding. I mean, we are losing a generation to drug overdose deaths. And I really can't explain the magnitude of this problem because, quite frankly, the mainstream media, especially nationally, is failing to do their jobs in covering this American crisis that's on full display, again, especially in these Pacific Northwest cities like Portland, San Francisco, Seattle, and of course in California, in places like Los Angeles, Skid Row, where it's just playing out. And you may be wondering, how did it get to this point? Well, a lot of it has to do with failed public policies that have just allowed drug use, open-air drug use to flourish. Here in Seattle recently, they just passed a law that further allows decriminalization of drugs. Just a year ago, it was a felony to have possession of hardcore drugs like cocaine, meth, and fentanyl. And now it'll remain just a simple misdemeanor. That's a slap on the wrist. So, you can't really enforce this stuff right now. And there really is no option for intervention. So we have these open-air drug markets right now just flourishing, and there's no end in sight. A video that I retweeted, actually, that was out of San Francisco. But yeah, I mean, it is just absolutely insane that this is America, that this is happening in a world-class city like San Francisco, arguably the tech mecca of the US. You have the headquarters of places like, Facebook and, Google and all these important companies, and yet you have the other spectrum of this human crisis just unfolding. People who are so badly addicted or, deep in the homeless crisis, literally giving birth on the streets. I mean, the question as journalists, so many of us are asking is this real, first of all? And second of all, why are we allowing this to happen in arguably the most wealthiest nation in the world? Occurrence. I have to carry Narcan now because every time I go into these homeless encampments, I would say the vast majority of the men and women are using some form of illicit drugs. And right now, the drug of choice is fentanyl. And it's the worst kept secret. It's not a conspiracy. I mean, there have been numerous, studies on this now showing that, these ingredients for fentanyl are coming from China and going straight to the Mexican cartels. And because our borders are so porous, the cartels know that it's open season on places like Seattle, where you have lax drug laws and virtually zero enforcement. Law enforcement will say, hey, we're going after the addicts. We're going after the dealers, and we don't want to criminalize this. So we don't put a stigma, over this, so the addicts can one day maybe get help instead of feeling fearful from the law. But my goodness, the consequences of just allowing this free-for-all to continue is just out of control. What's sad is that most of these addicts are aware. They know. I asked them point blank in a lot of my videos, are you aware of what you're doing? In fact, they even show me how to use some of these drugs and have offered me drugs on the streets. And of course, I've refused. But what that tells me is that these young men and women, in many cases, are fully aware of what they're doing, but the addiction is so bad that they're willing to gamble with their life. It's like playing Russian roulette, and they're willing to do it every single day to chase that high. Because when I asked them, if you talk to anyone trying to get off fentanyl, when they stop, they go through withdrawals. And they say the withdrawals are so painful that they'd rather take their chances with their life trying to maintain that high. Unfortunately, at the federal level, we're not seeing much movement. President Biden, and I don't want to get too political here, if he wanted to, he could probably go to China. And we know what China can do. If they really wanted to shut down the supply, they could do it tomorrow. We saw what they did with COVID-19. They literally shut their own people into apartments and shut down communities for months and weeks on end. So if they wanted to stop the flow of fentanyl, into the hands of the cartels and then into the U.S., they could do that. But right now, the relations between China and the U.S. are just so horrible that there's really zero negotiation happening on that front. So it's really now in the hands of local officials. And it really depends on what part of the country you live in. Look, I want to be very clear. We're not seeing this opioid epidemic or fentanyl crisis, exploding out of control in every U.S. state. It's primarily happening, unfortunately, in the big cities, especially, again, on the West Coast. Cities like Portland, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco. And these local jurisdictions, these local officials, unfortunately, they keep on going back to these policies that are not working. And primarily, one of the biggest issues is this whole harm reduction lobby. What essentially is happening on the ground right now is that this philosophy of harm reduction is to keep the addicts alive as long as possible until they're ready to get treatment. That means free meth pipes, fentanyl test strips, Narcan, needles are being given out to these addicts, hoping that one day that they're going to seek treatment. But if you meet any addict, not a single one will say, yeah, we want to get treatment. In other words, there are no requirements. There's no intervention happening right now on the ground in a lot of these West Coast cities with this harm reduction policy. And I truly believe, and critics of harm reduction will say, that's contributing to this drug epidemic in the US.
Thank you so much for watching. You get extra points for making it all the way to the end of the video.
And if you want to see more from me, Chloe and Callum, you can join us every Friday to Sunday on Times Radio from